The immersion into the Age of Pirates and the Golden Age of the Caribbean begins with an introduction full of the call of the seas and the aroma of freedom. Imagine the soothing lapping of waves, the distant cries of seagulls, and the wind, saturated with salt and sun, caressing the sails. Night envelops the tropical islands, and stars slowly light up above the calm surface of the Caribbean Sea. In this world of dreams, lying in a hammock on the deck of an old ship, you can feel the deck swaying to the rhythm of the ocean, with a lantern crackling nearby. The whispers of sailors, half asleep, carry through the sails. In these waters once lived those who chose true, unbridled freedom, obeying neither kings nor laws. Their fleet sailed from Jamaica to the Bahamas, from Cuba to the coasts of South America. Their names inspired fear, but behind each one lay a thirst for life, romance, and a daring dream. This is a story about the Golden Age of Piracy, about free-spirited people who sought not only treasure, but also a place where they could be themselves, live beyond boundaries, laugh at the laws, and disappear into the fog. Prepare for a night journey into this fascinating world. Let's embark on an imaginary journey through the waves of time and myth to where history itself is born, where the sea whispers its ancient legends and each wave crest holds its unique saga. Let's close our eyes, take a deep breath, and allow ourselves to fully immerse in this endless, soothing tranquility. Chapter 1. The Caribbean Archipelago for the Age of Piracy. Spanish galleons and fabulous treasures. Long before the ominous black flags with skulls and crossbones flew over the Caribbean Sea, long before pirate laughter filled the bays of Nassau and Port Royal, the same waters were dominated by a different power, the Spanish crown. The Caribbean islands at that time were not an arena for the unbridled rampage of free sea brotherhoods, but rather resembled a forbidden paradise garden to which European monarchs eagerly reached with their greedy hands, armed with maps, religious symbols, and royal decrees. They were drawn here by gold, untold riches whispered about in the luxurious halls of European palaces, and fertile land where, according to rumors, metal shimmered in the river flows, its value comparable to the sun itself. At the very center of this colonial dream stood galleons, majestic ships with high stern superstructures, sails inflated by the wind like the cheeks of a cherub, and batteries of cannons ready to unleash their wrath on anyone who dared to challenge them. These ships were not just means of transportation. They served as an embodiment of Spanish power, transporting gold, silver, precious stones, cocoa beans, tobacco, and other curiosities of the New World back to the Old World. In the Caribbean, like figures on a giant chessboard, Spanish galleons majestically plowed the waves, where every underwater rock, every patch of land, and every sudden storm held mortal danger. The Spanish crown, striving for dominance at sea, created these ships with an eye toward long and risky expeditions, strengthening their hulls with thick oak planks, turning them into floating fortresses, and filling them to the brim with precious silver ingots mined in the Potosi mines, and bags of golden sand from the depths of Central America. Sea routes were carefully planned, and ships gathered in Havana, transformed into a strategic logistics center and an impregnable outpost. It was here that impressive fleets were formed, which went down in history as silver caravans. Havana became a kind of gateway to the Old World, the starting point for the return journey to Seville and Cadiz, the prosperous ports of the Spanish Empire. Havana was protected from the sea by powerful bastions and artillery batteries. and from the land by an extensive network of observation posts. On the geographical maps of that time, Havana was marked as a key hub of all American trade, and the Spanish were determined to defend this vital point at any cost. However, untold riches always breed envy, and envy is the most destructive of storms. Behind every galleon laden with treasures trailed not only a foamy wake, but also an ominous whisper, the whisper of English, French, and Dutch privateers eager to break through the Spanish guard, like predatory sharks lurking in a pod of dolphins. Long before the onset of the Golden Age of Piracy, back in the mid-15th century, the first daring raids on Spanish galleons became a reality. These attacks were not spontaneous acts of willfulness, but carefully planned political actions, approved by governments seeking to undermine Spain's dominance at sea. It was then that the outlines of the coming anarchy began to take shape in the political arena. But in those days, the Spanish crown still ruled the ocean expanses unchallenged. Their navigation charts, zealously guarded and kept under strict secrecy, were as valuable as the silver itself. The captains of Spanish ships, hardened by countless sea voyages, possessed a unique ability to read the celestial signs and stars, sensing the slightest change in the wind by the barely perceptible tremor of the sails. Their sailors understood perfectly that each voyage was not just a movement from one point on the globe to another, but a real test, passed under the merciless tropical sun, in damp holds, among piles of bales of exotic spices, precious ingots, iron-bound chests, and provisions. Each day lived was like a long, salty sigh, filled with drowsiness. The Caribbean of that era was a picture of both enchanting beauty and undisguised cruelty. Impassable, verdant jungles loomed darkly over pristine white beaches. Coral reefs sparkled in the sunlight in the shallows, and behind the deceptive silence lay a constant threat. The indigenous peoples, who had inhabited these lands long before the arrival of Europeans, were significantly weakened by epidemics and bloody wars. The lands of the native inhabitants fell under the control of newcomers, and Spanish missions, fortresses, and watchtowers began to grow among the coconut palms. In that era, the Caribbean was a priceless cup over which Europe loomed, a cup filled to the brim with gold and spilled blood. And while the robes of Catholic priests fluttered on the decks of galleons, and the clinking of coins echoed in the holds, shadowy figures were already gathering in the hidden corners of this paradise. The first bandits, deserters, and exiles, striving not for order, but for freedom. Their time had not yet come, but the sea already foreshadowed their appearance. As untold treasures flowed from the New World to the Old, the Spanish Empire became increasingly vulnerable. It would seem that ships laden with gold and silver should have strengthened its position. But in the end, they spawned countless ill-wishers. England, France, and the Netherlands, states whose monarchs looked with envy on Spanish greatness, began to create their own fleets, sending naval sailors and privateers to the Caribbean, officially authorized to plunder Spanish ships in the interests of their countries. Thus, the Caribbean became not only a center of trade, but also a theater of a protracted and secret war. The Spanish crown, in an attempt to strengthen its power in the New World, launched a large-scale construction of fortifications along the strategically important coast of the Caribbean. Powerful fortresses, such as San Felipe, towering over Havana, the impregnable San Marcos in Florida, and the majestic El Morro in Puerto Rico, were to become the stronghold of Spanish domination. However, even these impressive fortifications could not stop the relentless course of events. Naval flotillas, designed to escort galleons laden with treasures, numerous artillery crews, and an extensive network of signal towers only temporarily restrained the onslaught. The more wealth sent to Europe, the stronger the interest in these ships grew among fortune seekers. The Caribbean Sea gradually filled with ships of all types and sizes, while Spanish galleons, filled to the brim with silver, arrived in Havana and Santo Domingo. Fast-moving smuggler ships were already lurking in secluded bays, offering weapons, rum, and fabrics. In these picturesque but dangerous places, fugitives of all kinds began to settle. Former sailors, tired of the strict discipline on the fleet, slaves who gained freedom after shipwrecks, and simply people without family or tribe, exiled from the old world in search of a new life. Gradually, settlements arose that were not recognized by any of the empires. In hidden bays, like predators in ambush, people with weathered faces and salty wind in their beards awaited prey. They did not yet call themselves pirates. They were simply hungry. They saw heavy, slow, and despite the protection, vulnerable galleons sailing past them. They heard snippets of conversations from taverns. There is gold worth 200,000 ducats on that ship. One successful capture, and you are set for life. Legends grew faster than sea waves. Thus, gradually, a new social stratum formed in the Caribbean. Grey, lawless, semi-real, semi-mythological. These were smugglers, fortune hunters, traders, robbers, and deserters. Among them, a special place was occupied by the buccaneers, emigrants from Europe, mainly French, who settled in Haiti and other islands. Initially, they hunted wild bulls and boars, as well as smoked meat, for which they got their name from the word boucan, which meant a smokehouse. However, they were not destined to remain peaceful hunters for long. Battle-hardened, armed to the teeth, and having tasted the free life, these men turned their deep knowledge of local waters and secret trails against the Spanish colonizers. Attempts by the Spanish crown to expel them from their inhabited islands, including punitive expeditions and the burning of settlements, proved futile. The buccaneers stubbornly rebuilt their camps and continued their struggle. Each act of intimidation only strengthened their unwavering resolve. They needed neither monarchs nor capital cities, content with gunpowder, rum, and a fair wind in their sails. In the night silence of the Caribbean Sea, cannon fire sounded more and more often, short, muffled, but instilling fear even in the hearts of the crews of heavy galleons. The fear of storms was compounded by a new terror, the fear of encountering an elusive shadow in the fog. The unknown spawned terrifying rumors of black ghost ships gliding without insignia, of risen dead scouring the waves, and of traitors lurking among their own. These ominous legends, like seaweed, entangled reality, creating the image of a new sea wolf, not a soldier, a loyal subject of the crown, but a free pirate, despising laws but sacredly honoring the bonds of brotherhood. Thus began a tectonic shift of epochs. The Caribbean Sea, once a calm corridor connecting the colonies with European metropolises, was transforming into a dangerous space of boundless opportunities. Where kings once reigned supreme, flags hastily drawn by hand would soon be raised. Cumbersome galleons would be replaced by light and swift sloops, capable of hiding from pursuit in the labyrinths of coral reefs. And although the Golden Age of Piracy was still several years away, its formidable breath was already felt in the air. With each year, Spanish ships became more vulnerable, and dreams of untold riches became bolder. In the holds of these ships, in addition to gold bars and jewels, matured the harbinger of a coming storm that would forever change the face of the Caribbean Sea. An era of change in the Caribbean, the birth of pirate freedom. Chapter 2. Filibusters and buccaneers. Who were they? In the early 15th century, the Caribbean Sea, like a hot mirror, reflected not only the clouds of heaven, but also the harbinger of impending changes. The Spanish crown continued to consider these waters its domain. On geographical maps, they were still marked as possessions of the empire, and Spanish galleons laden with treasures plied the sea between the New World and European lands. However, the reality was different. Beyond the Spanish fortresses, out of reach of cannons and the watchful eyes of sentries, stretched another world, where rules were set not by monarchs, but by luck, courage, and a fair wind. It was in this borderland, on the outskirts of civilization, that new characters began to appear: filibusters and buccaneers. Their names had not yet thundered in historical chronicles. Their daring exploits were not sung in ballads, but their presence was already felt as a harbinger of a storm, like the faint smell of gunpowder before a volley. The filibusters were a motley company of people from different countries: French, English, Dutch. Their homeland was distant European lands, but for them, this no longer mattered much. Among these adventurers were runaway sailors, soldiers, deserters, outcasts of European society, seeking not a return to the past, but a chance for a new life. Initially, they operated as privateers, having received official permission from the authorities to seize enemy ships. The English crown was particularly active in using this mechanism. Queen Elizabeth blessed attacks on Spanish ships if they brought profit to the state. However, the line between privateer and pirate became increasingly blurred. When the term of validity of permits expired, few rushed to lay down their arms. On the contrary, yesterday's privateers began to act independently, without flag and patronage, driven only by the conviction: if you are fast and daring enough, the sea belongs to you. At the same time, buccaneers lived on the shores of Haiti and other islands. These unusual people initially had nothing to do with piracy. They led a simple and harsh life, hunting in the jungles for feral bulls and boars left behind by Spanish colonists. The meat was smoked on wooden racks called boucan, which gave them their name. Their dwellings were simple huts, and their clothes were animal skins. But even in these humble people, the spirit of independence and defiance was already growing. Over time, the buccaneers, initially land hunters, began to actively acquire weapons, turning into a formidable force. Not being born sailors, they nevertheless possessed unsurpassed skills in shooting, hunting, and surviving in the most extreme conditions of wildlife. Their thorough knowledge of the area, including secret trails, hidden bays, and treacherous reefs, made them invaluable allies for sea robbers arriving from the sea. Gradually, the line between sea filibusters and land buccaneers began to blur, turning them into true brothers in arms. They willingly shared knowledge, experience, weapons, and of course rum, and soon common goals. United, they became a force to be reckoned with, even by the most powerful empires. They formed small but well-armed detachments, equipped with rifles, sabers, and muskets, and sought light, maneuverable vessels. Some captured old Spanish sloops, converting them to their needs, while others built their own ships to meet their specific requirements. These ships were not designed to carry gold, but they were full of stubbornness and audacity. Their high speed and maneuverability allowed them to make daring attacks, quickly disappear, and suddenly reappear, sowing panic among the enemy. Their goals were very clear: Spanish ships, coastal settlements, and well-guarded warehouses. They did not seek fame or large-scale wars. Their only goal was loot. They didn't need luxurious palaces, but they always needed rum, gunpowder, new sails, gold for ransom, silver in their pockets, and a quiet bay where they could wait out the approaching storm. Over time, they began to create their own fortified camps, turning them into real pirate bases. Among the many islands of the Caribbean archipelago, Tortuga, named for its resemblance to a giant turtle, gained notoriety as an impregnable stronghold of the filibusters. In this corner of the world, where formal authority was absent, there was a special order based on brute force and lawlessness. Tortuga became a kind of crossroads for all kinds of adventurers: fortune hunters, desperate robbers, and fugitive criminals, flocking here in search of easy money and refuge from justice. The arms trade flourished, stolen goods were briskly bought up, and anyone could enlist in a pirate crew. Life on Tortuga was subject to its own unwritten laws, or often without them at all. It was on Tortuga that the prototype of the famous pirate brotherhood was born, which later became the scourge of the seas. Here, disparate groups of treasure hunters and privateers were transformed into an organized, albeit informal, force. Ships arrived in Tortuga's harbor, recruiting teams of desperate thugs. Here, noisy feasts were held, daring agreements were concluded, stolen goods were divided, and a special pirate code of honor was gradually formed, not recorded on paper, but strictly observed by all members of the community. Each participant in the pirate raid knew for sure that his share would be divided fairly, that the captain was not a despot, but an elected leader who could be removed at any moment, that each member of the team had the right to vote and was obliged to honor the laws of the Brotherhood. This spirit of equality, freedom, and unwavering honor seemed unthinkable in proper monarchical Europe. But here, on the island, where the air was saturated with the smell of rum, gunpowder smoke, and intoxicating freedom, it became a harsh reality. The sea robbers did not yet call themselves pirates, but in their hearts, what would later turn them into legendary heroes and villains of the seas was already ripening. Over time, the ranks of brave warriors and sea wolves steadily thinned as more and more veterans left the service, tired of strict discipline and unquestioning obedience. The alluring freedom, like a mirage, drew them to the unexplored corners of the Caribbean archipelago, where there was no power or control. If previously such renegades were isolated cases, now they began to form entire teams, driven by a thirst for change. Some deserted from the army, others fled from merchant ships, and still others simply could no longer bear the oppression of the crown. All of them were united by an irrepressible desire to break free from the shackles of the familiar world and find refuge where the laws lost their power. Tortuga became a real magnet, attracting not just adventurers, but also those who longed to live by their own rules. Here you could meet French, English, Scottish, Dutch, a colorful mixture of cultures, languages, and fates. Although they did not always understand each other, they were united by a common passion for the sea, a thirst for prey, and an implacable hatred of the Spanish. The filibusters, whose home was Tortuga, were not just disparate gangs, but well-organized detachments, capable of acting coherently, quickly, and efficiently. Their goals were carefully thought out. They attacked caravans, captured weak forts, and robbed merchant ships. Sometimes these were lightning raids on coastal warehouses, and sometimes sieges of entire cities, which terrified the Spanish crown. The sea wolves of the Caribbean showed remarkable patience, conducting painstaking reconnaissance and tracking down their targets. These were not just savage cutthroats, but strategists whose success was based on precise calculations and cold-bloodedness. Their attacks fell like heavenly fire, swift, merciless, and disappearing before the gunpowder smoke cleared. It was then that the first legends began to arise on the high seas about captains whose names were spoken with bated breath, whether out of respect or animal fear. Among these legendary figures was Pierre Le Grand, a French corsair whose name resounded throughout the world in 1666. With a handful of desperate daredevils, only 20 men, he managed to capture a Spanish galleon filled to the brim with gold. His ship, old and battered, seemed to have no chance against the formidable Spanish vessel. However, Le Grand showed miracles of ingenuity and stealth. Under the cover of thick fog, using oars, he approached the enemy unnoticed and boarded her. This audacious act astonished even the seasoned Spanish sailors. For the first time in history, a galleon, the symbol of Spain's naval power, fell victim to such a small but incredibly daring crew. Another equally famous character of that era was François l'Olonnais, a man whose cruelty and despair became legendary. After escaping slavery, he led a series of daring raids on Spanish cities, among which the capture of Maracaibo stands out. He acted with cold-blooded methodicalness, like an avenger driven only by a thirst for revenge. Chilling rumors circulated about him, that he tore enemies apart with his bare hands, that his body was invulnerable to bullets and blades. This man's name became a sinister curse, instilling terror in the hearts of Spanish captains. The appearance of l'Olonnais's ship on the horizon meant certain death. However, not all buccaneers were so cruel. Among them were those who adhered to a peculiar code of honor. They avoided senseless killings, fairly divided the loot, and offered the residents of a city the opportunity to surrender before attacking it. Of course, these rules were not always followed, but their very existence testified to the fact that the pirates of that era were beginning to see themselves not just as robbers, but as representatives of another world, where courage, brotherhood, and freedom of choice were valued above titles and noble attire. Tortuga flourished, becoming a bustling transit point. Not only pirates flocked here, but also merchants willing to buy up the looted property. Here you could buy gunpowder, sails, and recruit a crew for sea voyages. In numerous taverns, rum flowed like a river, dice rattled, and loot was divided. Alliances were formed here, and betrayals were committed. In the shade of the palm trees, the history of anarchy was born, foreshadowing the onset of the Golden Age of Piracy. The buccaneers gradually left their settled lands, giving way to the marine element. The life of hunters was becoming a thing of the past, replaced by the harsh reality of sailors. They mastered the art of sailing ships, learned to shoot accurately from cannons and board ships. The first raids were modest, but with each year the pirate campaigns became more daring and large-scale. Ships began to appear on the high seas, having undergone a targeted transformation to meet the needs of pirate fishing, characterized by lightweight, high speed, and excellent maneuverability. The number of guns on board was reduced in order to achieve greater agility, while the number of hatches and descents was increased to ensure the fastest possible access to the hold where the loot was stored. England and France, at that time interested in weakening Spain's influence, deliberately ignored the actions of their former subjects engaged in piracy. Moreover, in some cases they provided covert support to the pirates, providing them with weapons and promising forgiveness in exchange for service. Thus, an environment was formed in which official and unofficial activities existed in parallel. Pirates were in demand as long as they brought profit, but over time they needed someone's permission less and less. Their power increased, and their fleets turned into real naval armies. They no longer limited themselves to attacks on individual ships, but posed a threat to entire ports, laid siege to cities, and made their own demands. Ignoring their presence became impossible. Thus, from a mixture of gunpowder, rum, despair, and the clink of gold coins, genuine piracy was born, representing not just criminal activity, but an alternative way of life, a challenge to the existing order, a world where the ship is a state, the captain is elected by the crew, and brotherhood becomes the law. The era of unprecedented prosperity of piracy had not yet fully arrived, but each new daring attack, each captured harbor, each song sounding by the campfire on the legendary Tortuga, inexorably brought it closer, like a sea wave reaching the shore. The power of kings no longer extended to the vast expanse of the seas. They now belonged to those brave seafarers who dared to sail against the current. Chapter 3 tells of the Golden Age of Piracy, a period marked by freedom, brotherhood, and untold riches. It was a time when the sails of pirate ships were filled not only with favorable winds, but also with an aura of glory and myth. In the late 17th and early 18th centuries, the Caribbean Sea became the epicenter of audacious liberty, where state laws lost their power, giving way to the unwritten laws of the pirate brotherhood, and authority rested in the hands of those who were not afraid to raise the ominous black flag above their ship. This period, known in history as the Golden Age of Piracy, was relatively short-lived, less than 100 years. But it was during this brief time that legends and myths arose that have survived for centuries. Pirates no longer lurked in secluded bays. They acted openly, boldly challenging authority and social norms. They attacked not only solitary merchant ships, but entire fleets, striking terror into the hearts of sailors. They plundered coastal cities, blockaded ports, dictated their terms, and, at the same time, created a unique culture with its own symbols, rituals, speeches, music, and even ideology. They addressed each other as brothers, and their fleets were called brotherhoods, based not on blood ties, but on a shared choice of lifestyle. In an era when the aristocracy prided itself on its origin, pirates chose the path of equality and fraternity. On board their ships, each member of the crew had a voice, and his opinion mattered. Before each voyage, the pirates gathered for a council to elect a captain, a man they trusted to lead them into battle and adventure. The captain was not a despot. His power was limited by the will of the crew. If he showed cowardice or injustice, he could be removed from his post. The most important decisions regarding course, objectives, and distribution of loot were made collectively, in contrast to the strict hierarchy of state fleets, where sailors were merely cogs in a huge machine. The pirate brotherhood, of course, was not without its flaws. Betrayal, cruelty, and greed marred their ranks. But even in these conditions, the idea of freedom remained unshakable. Here, no one could dictate who you should be. Everyone could remain themselves or strive for new heights. The share of the loot was distributed according to role. The captain and quartermaster received 1.5 shares each, and the remaining crew members received 1 share each. In the event of injury in battle, a pirate received compensation from a common fund, which was a form of social insurance. No one was left alone. If a pirate died, his share went to his family or comrades, providing them with support and protection. During the heyday of piracy, the crews of sea robbers sealed their relationships with handwritten codes, a kind of charter, under which all crew members signed. The content of these documents could vary from ship to ship, but the fundamental principles remained unchanged. Equality among all pirates, strict discipline, willingness to help a comrade, and honest distribution of loot. Violation of the code was severely punished. Theft was punishable by being marooned on a desert island, and drunkenness during battle was punishable by death. It was these strict rules that created an atmosphere of order and organization on a pirate ship, a kind of island of stability in a raging sea of chaos. Pirates lived by their own laws. They ate what they could obtain or capture, quenched their thirst with rum, smoked pipes, and adorned themselves with bright fabrics, beads, and earrings. However, these decorations served not so much for beauty as they were symbols of their special status. The appearance of pirates was a manifestation of freedom, a rejection of uniforms and signs of submission. Scraps, feathers, and fabrics woven into hair became a symbol not of wildness, but of a demonstrative protest against a world where everything is predetermined. The pirates of the Golden Age sailed not only the Caribbean Sea, but also went to the shores of Brazil, carried out daring raids on the cities of the South American coast, crossed the Atlantic Ocean, appeared off the coast of Africa, and even reached India. In one of the most incredible episodes, pirates reached Madagascar and the Red Sea, where they attacked ships of the Mughal Empire returning from pilgrimage to Mecca. The heart of pirate liberty remained the bountiful Caribbean basin, where Port Royal, located in Jamaica, and Nassau, located in the Bahamas, were of particular importance. Port Royal gained a scandalous reputation as the most depraved city on earth, where taverns, brothels, and gambling houses openly flourished. However, like Tortuga, this place attracted not only debauchery, but also a sense of freedom from any shackles. Although pirates were known for their cruelty, they were free in their choices. Risking their lives every day, they relished the moment, singing songs, indulging in drunken revelry, sharing gleaming golden ducats, and listening to the menacing roar of the sea against the city walls. During its heyday, piracy became an integral part of the maritime economy. Merchants who hypocritically condemned pirates often entered into secret agreements with them. Colonial authorities, neglected by their metropolises, turned a blind eye to pirate raids, content with a modest share of the loot. Some pirates, whose names echoed across the seas, were pardoned by the crown itself and transformed into governors, prosperous merchants, and respected members of society. But behind this glittering facade lay another, less appealing side of life. Behind every daring raid, behind every shimmering piece of gold, lurked fear, bloodshed, and unrelenting anxiety. And increasingly, not only defenseless merchant ships appeared on the horizon, but also formidable warships sent to hunt down the sea robbers. The time of pirate freedom was bright, but alas, short-lived. Every endeavor born of bold ambitions and daring dreams inevitably encounters harsh reality. The rise of piracy in the early 18th century, reaching its peak, began to cause increasing concern among ruling monarchs and large trading corporations. What had previously been tolerated condescendingly out of political expediency or due to geographical remoteness had now become a serious obstacle to stable development. Colonial possessions expanded, trade routes became more reliable, and powerful empires no longer needed destructive chaos. What had recently been perceived as courageous adventurism was now universally branded as a grave crime. Naval fleets of European powers launched a systematic hunt for sea robbers, and detachments of privateers, yesterday's allies, transformed into formidable anti-piracy squadrons. Warships bristling with cannons arrived in key Caribbean ports, carrying contingents of soldiers and a strict order. No negotiations, only complete annihilation. Large-scale arrests, sudden raids, and public executions began. Pirates were offered a pardon, but only once. Accept the king's grace and live as a law-abiding subject, or reject it and meet an ignominious end. Some celebrated captains accepted royal forgiveness. They were simply tired of endless wanderings, had managed to amass considerable wealth, and now craved a peaceful life. They securely hid their plundered treasures in secret locations, acquired fertile lands, and opened cozy taverns. But others, the most rebellious and stubborn, remained true to the sea. They skillfully evaded the pursuit of naval fleets, hid in secluded bays, changed their names, and carefully disguised their ships. These reckless individuals understood perfectly well that coveted freedom came at a high price, and they were willing to pay it to the very end. In the final years of the brilliant era of piracy, the most famous sea robbers in the annals of history emerged and passed away. Among them stands out Edward Teach, better known by the ominous nickname Blackbeard. His name became synonymous with unbridled fear and terror. This ruthless captain adorned his thick beard with lit fuses, which smoldered menacingly in the heat of battle, creating a diabolical image. His silhouette, emerging from the fog, instilled such terror in the hearts of enemies that victory was often achieved without a single shot. Blackbeard was not just the captain of a pirate ship. He became a symbol of the very idea of piracy: daring, independent, unpredictable, and absolutely fearless. In 1718, his life tragically ended in a fierce battle off the coast of North Carolina. The head of the defeated pirate was displayed on the bow of the ship as a grim warning, clearly demonstrating that the era of piracy was coming to an end. Another legendary figure of that era was Bartholomew Roberts, also known as Black Bart. This daring pirate committed over 400 attacks, captured a huge number of ships, and terrorized sailors not only in the Caribbean, but also off the coast of distant Africa. Black Bart differed from his peers. He wore exquisite lace shirts, preferred to drink tea from delicate porcelain cups, and maintained strict discipline in his crew. His ship was a veritable floating fortress, and his crew was known for its iron endurance and unquestioning obedience. In 1722, Black Bart fell in battle, displaying unwavering will and refusing to surrender. His heroic death was one of the last chords of an entire era, marking the end of the Golden Age of Piracy. Anne Bonny and Mary Read, two celebrated female pirates, became the embodiment of female courage and rebellious spirit. Dressed in men's attire, they bravely entered battles, skillfully commanded sea vessels, experienced love affairs, committed betrayals, and found ways to escape. After capture, they were sentenced to death, but they managed to avoid it by announcing their pregnancies. Their subsequent lives are shrouded in mystery, like most pirate tales, elusive and vague, like the outlines of sails disappearing on the horizon. The Golden Age of Piracy was gradually but inexorably coming to an end. Harbors that once welcomed pirates began to betray them. Pirate brotherhoods disintegrated, and the surviving pirates became loners, hiding in the backwaters of civilization. They were no longer subjects of songs and ballads, but were labeled robbers, criminals, and sea bandits. Nevertheless, they remained different in the memory of the sea, because piracy of that time was more than just robbery. It was a daring attempt to create an alternative society where everyone had a voice, choice, and fair distribution of loot, where the ship became a floating republic, and the captain expressed the will of the crew, not serving the interests of a monarch. In an era when success was measured not by mountains of gold, but by the inner conviction of following one's own principles, legends of pirates were born. Stories of sea robbers live in people's hearts, not because of tales of cruelty and treasure, but as a symbol of freedom gained under the onslaught of the salty wind. This is the freedom that cannot be bought with money, a freedom beckoning beyond the horizon, even if the path leads to sunset. The golden era of piracy has faded into oblivion. Sea charts are once again dotted with state borders. Merchant ships ply the oceans under the flags of powerful empires, and pirate bays are empty, giving way to tranquility. But just close your eyes and listen, and in the shadow of coral reefs, in the whisper of the surf, and in the silence of the night, the echo of freedom still sounds. Somewhere out there, in the distance, a ship under a black flag still sails the waves, fluttering in the wind. And perhaps, in dreams, its silhouette will appear, gliding in the moonlight among the sea expanses. Chapter 4 is dedicated to pirate republics, such as Nassau and other havens where lawlessness reigned. The Caribbean has seen many ports and secluded bays, but among all these places, Nassau holds a special place, a city whose name is forever inscribed in the chronicle of the free sea. This small town, located on the island of New Providence and surrounded by a labyrinth of reefs and lagoons, became the true capital of a world where there was no place for kings and emperors. In this place, there were no usual laws dictated by London, Paris, or Madrid. Here, their own rules were born, created by those who abandoned faith in decrees from above, who dared to choose a different path. By the beginning of the 18th century, Nassau had become a citadel of piracy. After a series of devastating hurricanes and failed attempts at colonization, the English crown effectively renounced the city. Official authority evaporated, the garrison was disbanded, and the fortifications fell into disrepair. But the vacuum, like the sea abyss, does not tolerate silence. Pirates came to replace the guardians of the law. Here, among dilapidated buildings, dilapidated docks, and sandy streets, corsairs began to build their own world. Nassau became the prototype of what would later be called a pirate republic, not in a formal, legal sense, but as a self-governing community where decisions were made collectively, where there was no place for aristocracy, where anyone could become a captain, receiving the support of the crew. Nassau was far from a utopia. It was a city of contrasts, noisy, dirty, crowded with people and ambitions. Here, rum was sold by the bucket, gambling was rampant right on the doorsteps of huts, and music sounded, representing a wild mixture of English ballads, African rhythms, and Caribbean motifs. Here, pirates lived life to the fullest, loved, died, planned daring raids, divided loot, resolved conflicts, and celebrated victories boisterously. The whole city turned into a semblance of a ship at anchor, with its unique traditions and customs. Nassau was not just a chaotic accumulation, but also a striking example of egalitarianism. A person's origin did not play a decisive role here. Those freed from slavery could equally join the ranks of sea crews. Representatives of the most diverse peoples, Africans, Irish, Scots, French, Corsicans, people of mixed blood, runaway peasants, and inveterate criminals, all found their place in the sun here. In an era when skin color, religious beliefs, and origin predetermined one's life path, Nassau seemed to be a unique phenomenon, perhaps not the most decent, noisy, and unsafe, but certainly free. Each new day in Nassau began to the accompaniment of the cries of seagulls, with the aroma of fried fish and a light rum haze enveloping the streets. The creak of rigging could be heard on the coast. Sails were being repaired, and barrels were being filled with water. In taverns, as soon as the doors opened, lively conversations would begin. Navigation routes were discussed, along with the latest news about rich galleons, the vulnerabilities of various ports, and the size of the potential loot. Decisions were made quickly. Crews were formed in a matter of hours, armed, stocked with provisions, and then set sail again. Nassau had become a true magnet, attracting not only pirates, but also merchants, smugglers, and deserters. Ideas of freedom, equality, and rebellion against monarchical regimes were in the air. Of course, these ideas were not formalized into clear manifestos, as pirates were not inclined to write philosophical treatises. The free spirit that prevailed among them was harsh and undisguised, imbued with the scent of the sea and hard labor. But it was this very ease that attracted the hearts of adventurers. In a society where everyone's fate was predetermined, here there was a rare opportunity to determine one's own path. Although pirate havens such as Tortuga, St. Thomas, and Madagascar served as refuges for sea robbers in different eras, it was Nassau that managed to become a true symbol of piracy, a port where legends were made. Personalities whose names would forever remain in the annals of history gathered here. Benjamin Hornigold, Charles Vane, Jack Rackham, Anne Bonny, Mary Read, and Edward Teach himself, better known as Blackbeard. They shared tables and rum, wove intrigues, and devised plans for daring attacks. At times, the city turned into a kind of gladiatorial arena where issues were resolved. Who would go on a raid with whom? Who would be entrusted with command? How to fairly divide the loot? Often, disputes were resolved in fierce battles, with the clash of blades and curses. But more often, the outcome depended on luck and dice and the generosity of the drinks. Everyone who came here knew the local laws, albeit unwritten, but fundamentally fair. Anyone had the right to speak. Anyone could leave this brotherhood. It was a kind of utopian society, living for the moment. Pirates did not make long-term plans. They lived in the present. And it was this spirit of freedom and adventure that inspired their followers. In an era when human destinies seemed rigidly predetermined, a group of daredevils dared to demonstrate that there was another path. Although their freedom was fleeting, because no free spirit can last forever, especially in our world, where every new day brings changes and new rules. By the beginning of the second decade of the 18th century, the British Crown turned its gaze to Nassau. At first, this island seemed too remote, fragmented, and wild. But the situation changed when the pirates began to act defiantly. The capture of ships, attacks on colonies, and the blockade of trade routes began to threaten not only Spanish interests, but also Britain itself. The empire could not allow anarchy near its borders. In 1718, Woodes Rogers arrived in Nassau, appointed by the Crown as governor, an experienced sailor and privateer, a man who understood the past and looked to the future. He did not arrive with weapons, but with peaceful intentions. In his hands was a document of royal pardon, amnesty for all pirates willing to lay down their arms and swear allegiance to the British Crown. This act became both salvation and a harbinger of the end of their former lives for Nassau. Rogers had a clear plan in mind. A storm of Nassau, a city like an impregnable fortress, was doomed to failure. Natural reefs served as a reliable shield, and in the event of a military threat, the city could instantly empty, like water flowing back into the sea. The admiral understood that the only way to conquer the pirate lair was through persuasion. He offered the robbers forgiveness, deliverance from persecution, and the opportunity to start a new life. Many of them, exhausted by battles, wounded, and disappointed, accepted his offer as salvation. Among them was even Benjamin Hornigold, one of the founding fathers of pirate Nassau, who now embarked on the path of eradicating his former comrades. However, not all pirates were ready to lay down their arms. Some, like Charles Vane, scornfully rejected the amnesty, considering it an act of betrayal. They did not believe in the mercy of the king and did not want to obey the established order. Their hearts longed for their former life, full of freedom, sea wind, and brotherhood. Vane and his supporters left Nassau, rushing into the vast expanses of the sea, dreaming of building a new free haven. But the era of pirate freedom was coming to an end. With the departure of the former leaders and the establishment of legitimate power, Nassau began to transform. Strict barracks replaced noisy taverns, and meetings of officials replaced pirate gatherings on the pier. Freedom was replaced by tax records, court decisions, and ship registration. The city gradually turned into an ordinary colony, as was originally intended. The streets were cleared of robbers, the harbour was patrolled, and the remnants of the former freedom retreated into the Caribbean, scattering and disappearing. The fall of Nassau became a tragic symbol of the end of the era of the Pirate Republic. The era when anyone could arrive in port and acquire a new identity is irrevocably gone. All that remains are tales passed down from seasoned sailors to young listeners about a time when decisions in this bay were made by popular vote, when the captain was not an aristocrat, but someone who had earned the crew's trust, when freedom was valued above gold. There is a greatness of spirit in the finale of this story, for no empire, however mighty, can eradicate what lives in people's hearts. Nassau ceased to exist as a political entity, but remained in the memory of the maritime world as a legend, as a symbol of a place where the impossible became reality. The descendants of pirates changed their trade, becoming fishermen, soldiers, and merchants. The pirate ships that once roamed the seas either rotted in secluded bays or were burned, but the spirit of freedom lived on. This spirit is reflected in songs, literary works, and legends. It lived in ballads about brotherhood, about ships that flew no flags, about a code of honor among sea robbers. It lived in the heart of the Caribbean, in the waves that hold the whispers of those who believe that man is born free, not to be subjugated. Thus ended one of the most amazing social experiments in human history. In a small port city, lost in the tropical latitudes, people briefly created a society that did not submit to the will of others. This society was far from ideal, sometimes cruel and bloody, but it was alive. And although it was destroyed, exiled, and forgotten, it left an indelible mark, like a deep wake cutting through the sea surface. Today, pirate republics cannot be found on geographical maps. They have disappeared like the wake of a ship dissolving beyond the horizon. Listening to the lapping of the waves and closing your eyes, you can momentarily transport yourself to a distant shore where laws do not rule, where the heavens seem bottomless, and a fire burns at the walls of an old tavern. There, a song of freedom rings out, a melody that is forever imprinted in the memory of the seas. Chapter 5 is dedicated to the legendary captains, Blackbeard, Anne Bonny, and Calico Jack. When it comes to pirates, the first things that come to mind are not images of fearsome fleets, fluttering flags, or historical dates, but names, as if engraved on the masts of history, deep and indelible as footprints on the deck of an old ship. Among the countless numbers of those who took up boarding hooks and divided treasures on sun-scorched beaches, only a few have been honored to become true symbols. They are remembered and revered centuries later, perceived as archetypes, as images that continue their voyage through generations, swaying in the shimmering haze woven from truth and fiction. One such prominent figure is Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard. He was not particularly cruel or immensely wealthy, but he managed to instill genuine terror. Standing over 6 feet tall, powerfully built, and possessing considerable strength, he wore a beard as black as coal, into which he skillfully wove burning fuses. On the eve of battle, he indulged in a sinister ritual. He lit the fuses, and clouds of smoke snaked around his face, forming a kind of demonic cloak. In the night gloom, shrouded in fog, his appearance lost its human features from afar, turning into a legend woven from horror. Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, inspired awe not only with the power of his guns, but also with his terrifying image, which was the source of his diabolical power. He did not resort to senseless cruelty, for he understood that fear is a powerful weapon, saving powder and shot. His tactics were precise and accurate, like a deadly saber strike. He did not waste lives in vain, realizing the value of every shot, every human destiny, every minute of time. His flagship, the majestic Queen Anne's Revenge, was one of the most formidable ships of its era. Armed with 50 guns manned by hundreds of brave cutthroats, it combined speed, maneuverability, and devastating power. This ship was his impregnable fortress, his proud banner, his personal state, ruling the seas without division. Blackbeard did not just carry out raids, he subjugated entire fleets. He was an experienced and insightful leader, able to manage his crew, maintaining iron discipline. A strict code of honor reigned on his ship. There were clear rules and a hierarchy. He was not a wild barbarian, but a talented commander with strategic thinking. This was the true threat posed by Blackbeard, not in blind chaos and destruction, but in a cold mind directed against the established system. But even this legendary pirate was not invulnerable. In 1718, a special expedition led by Lieutenant Robert Maynard was dispatched to capture him, determined to end Blackbeard's dominion over the seas. At dawn, as a misty haze still enveloped the waters of a North Carolina bay, the legendary Blackbeard's final battle unfolded. He fought with a fury worthy of the devil himself. More than 20 wounds gaped on his body, and only after the 5th musket volley did the pirate fall. His severed head, mounted on the bow of the victor's ship, became a gruesome trophy. But even death could not erase his image from human memory. He continued to live in every breath of wind that billowed the sails, in every tale told around the night campfire. For Blackbeard was not merely mortal. He was the embodiment of primal fear, indomitable will, and absolute anarchy. Entirely different was Anne Bonny, a woman who dared to break free from the shadow of another's destiny. Born in Ireland, the daughter of a lawyer, she grew up in an atmosphere of hidden secrets. Her mother was a servant, and her father, a respected nobleman, forced to flee to the New World to avoid a major scandal. In America, Anne blossomed into a headstrong, bold, and rebellious personality. She defied the conventions of her era, dressing in men's clothing, masterfully wielding weapons, engaging in disputes with men, and prevailing. In Nassau, her path crossed with that of the pirate John Rackham, better known as Calico Jack. He was irresistibly charming, elegant, and flaunted bright jackets made of cheap fabric, calico, which gave him his nickname. While he may not have been the most skilled captain, he possessed undeniable personal charm. Their love ignited suddenly, passionately, and irrevocably, and Anne followed him into the sea's abyss. Anne Bonny was not merely an ornament on the pirate deck. She fought alongside the men, unashamed of strong language, downing mug after mug of rum, and fearlessly boarding enemy ships. Those who did not know her true gender mistook her for a courageous man. So confident and fierce was her gait, so piercing her gaze, so daring her behavior. And those who knew the truth treated her with respect, and sometimes even fear. She earned her place in pirate history. However, just as the sea is changeable, so too is fate unpredictable. In October 1720, Calico Jack's pirate brig fell victim to a British squadron. The sailors, gripped by panic and intoxication, did not put up a worthy fight. Only 2 women, Anne Bonny and Mary Read, displayed unwavering will to fight. In the ship's hold, they desperately defended themselves until they were disarmed and taken prisoner. At trial, all 3 faced a harsh sentence, death. But Anne and Mary avoided it due to their interesting condition. The execution was postponed. The subsequent fate of these courageous women is shrouded in mystery. Rumors abounded. Some claimed they died within prison walls, others that they managed to escape and start new lives under assumed names. But Anne Bonny's name remained in history, not just as an addendum to a male legend, but as a symbol of independence and a rebellious spirit, as the banner of a woman who preferred the open sea, freedom, and weapons to everything else. As for Calico Jack, known as John Rackham, his name entered history not because of great victories or captured ships. His contribution to the era of piracy lay in creating a unique style, in knowing how to be a vivid symbol of his time. He possessed charisma, was eloquent and generous. He was distinguished by a love of life, a desire for luxury, and a disregard for military discipline. He did not crave power, but strived for a free life, for enjoying every moment. His pirate flag, adorned with a skull and crossed sabers, became one of the most recognizable symbols of piracy. Calico Jack was a man whose passions belonged entirely to wine, music, and the company of beautiful ladies. He was neither cruel nor bloodthirsty. His crew valued him for his ability to find common ground, for his ability to settle disputes with words, avoiding violence. However, it was this character trait that became his Achilles heel. His raids were marked by boldness, but suffered from a lack of planning. His ship was often overloaded, poorly armed, and the crew was characterized by recklessness, bordering on recklessness. Ultimately, it was this carelessness that led them to a tragic end. On the fateful night when the British warship overtook them off the coast of Jamaica, Calico Jack was asleep, and a significant portion of his crew was intoxicated. Only 2 women, Anne Bonny and Mary Read, took up arms. They fought with courage and ferocity to the last breath, but their efforts were not enough to turn the tide of events. The crew was captured, taken to Port Royal, and there, under the leaden sky where pirates once felt at ease, the trials began. The sentences were harsh, handed down immediately, and not subject to appeal. As Calico Jack stood before the gallows, he remained calm, perhaps even with a hint of sadness in his eyes. Anne Bonny's last words to him became forever etched in the annals of pirate folklore. "If you had fought like a man, you wouldn't be hanged like a dog." He departed life as he had lived it, neither a hero nor a villain, but a figure torn between romantic ideals and harsh reality. However, his memory was preserved not in official reports, but in folk ballads, on pirate flags, and in the timeless association. A pirate is not only about battles, but also a conscious choice to live outside conventional norms, following one's own heart. In the annals of piracy, Mary Read holds a special place. Her life was woven from intrigue and a struggle for self-determination. From a very early age, Mary was drawn into a cunning deception. Her mother, seeking to maintain financial well-being, passed her off as her deceased brother, forcing Mary from a young age to master masculine occupations, acquiring skills in work, combat, and survival in a harsh world. Military service became her school of life, hardening her character and preparing her for future trials. Participating in naval battles, she learned the price of freedom and justice, which ultimately led her aboard a pirate ship, where she met a kindred spirit, Anne Bonny. Between them arose a silent understanding, a connection between 2 women who dared to challenge societal norms and gender stereotypes. They fought not only enemy ships, but also prejudices imposed upon them by their gender, society, and history. Like Anne Bonny, Mary Read avoided imminent execution by declaring her pregnancy during the trial. However, she was not destined to escape a sad fate. She died in prison from a fever. Despite not being able to go into one last battle, her story continues to live on as a symbol of the struggle for one's identity, for the right to be oneself despite circumstances. Mary Read is an example of a person who did not accept the role prescribed to her, but created her own, full of risk, danger, and freedom. Around such iconic figures as Blackbeard, Anne Bonny, and Calico Jack revolve many other, no less interesting characters. Henry Every, nicknamed the Pirate King, made a daring raid in the annals of maritime history when pirates, seizing the treasures of the Great Mogul, vanished without a trace into the sea, taking with them untold riches. Bartholomew Roberts, whose name struck terror into sailors, was not just a bloodthirsty robber, but also a refined man, possessing iron discipline. His life ended in battle, with a pirate flag in his hands, which became a symbol of his unyielding will. Samuel Bellamy, nicknamed Black Sam, was famous for his passionate speeches about justice, positioning himself as a defender of the downtrodden. These names are not just historical facts, they are legends, myths, masks, emerging from the sea foam. Behind each of them lies something more than just a biography. They are archetypes, reflecting the eternal human desire for freedom and independence. Yes, they were far from ideal, made mistakes, sometimes showed cruelty, but they lived in accordance with their beliefs. This is where their appeal lies. Their lives, though short, were filled with meaning, devoid of compromises, lies, and excuses. Why does the memory of them not fade over time? Why 3 centuries later, do pirate flags adorn clothing, books, and films? The answer is simple. Deep down, every person has a desire for freedom, a dream of endless seas, of being able to throw off shackles, even golden ones, and live by their own rules. The legendary pirates embodied what few succeed in. They became themselves, not faceless copies, not cogs in a huge machine. They took the helm of their own destiny, even if it led them to a tragic end. Their names have not sunk into oblivion. They are not just characters from history textbooks. They are shadows of freedom, gliding between the stars and waves. And if one night you hear the distant clanging of an anchor chain, or the cry of seagulls over the boundless sea, perhaps it is an echo of the legend, a reminder that each of us is capable of becoming the captain of our own life. All you need to do is muster the courage and raise the sails. Chapter 6. Against the Norm. Women on pirate ships. The history of maritime robbery, like an old map, has long been created exclusively by men. In engravings of past eras, stern captains with bushy beards appear, faces marked with scars, glittering sabers, and the indispensable barrels of rum. Literary works glorify brotherhood, strong alcohol, and the indomitable element. However, along with these brutal and heroic images, another, less emphasized storyline is subtly traced, the female one. It is like a thin but strong thread running through the centuries-old fabric of pirate existence, existing not for show, but against the circumstances, not openly challenging, but simply remaining true to oneself. These women could not find their place in a society that relegated females to the roles of obedient wives, servants, or objects of comfort. They did not conform to accepted norms, where a woman's fate was determined not by her own aspirations, but solely by her gender. But they existed, and their very appearance on the pirate scene made the sea hold its breath in anticipation of the coming storm. The most striking examples are, of course, Anne Bonny and Mary Read, whose biographies are like dazzling flashes that broke through the dense darkness of prejudice. They lived side by side with men, fought as equals, and obeyed only the laws they set for themselves. They became not just an exception to the rules, but living proof that the pursuit of freedom has no gender, just like a deadly blade or a voice rising in defense of independence. In the shadow of the loud fame of famous pirates, there are figures of women whose exploits were not sung in songs and were not immortalized in engravings. They commanded ships, skillfully disguised as men, conducted complex negotiations, and confidently managed crews. Their names rarely reached posterity, but their presence was felt in every rustle of sails under the cover of night, in the barely noticeable shadow cast by a wide-brimmed hat, in a strong hand firmly holding the helm. In some pirate crews, women enjoyed equal rights, and sometimes they were accepted into the crew without asking unnecessary questions about the past. In the harsh world of pirates, It was not name and origin that were valued, but courage, loyalty, and a keen eye. Many women became a real nightmare for enemies, not because of their gender, but because of their military qualities. One such outstanding personality was Qingxi, whose life and deeds unfolded not in the Caribbean, but in China at the beginning of the 19th century. Her story is so large-scale that it deserves the widest ocean expanses. After becoming a pirate's widow, she did not lose heart, but took command of a huge flotilla of more than 60,000 people. She was respected for her fairness, feared for her strictness, and obeyed her will without question. The code established by Qingxi was severe. Desertion and rape were punishable by death. We see the image of a woman who managed to create a formidable, almost invincible army from disparate detachments. Unlike many of her colleagues in the trade, she managed to end her career with a triumph. In the zenith of fame and wealth, having received forgiveness from the authorities, she ended her days in her own bed. Although Qingxi operated on the other side of the world, her life path echoes the fate of Anne Bonny, embodying indomitable will, determination, and the desire to be an independent person. Probably, it is this desire for self-sufficiency that unites all women who have chosen the pirate craft. A thirst to be not just an addition, but a bright, complete, and independent figure. However, not all women took up arms. Many found their place in the pirate world in other ways. They became owners of port taverns, engaged in smuggling, passed on valuable information, provided medical assistance, and sheltered the wounded. Some became loyal companions of captains, but not as silent shadows, but as equal advisors, active participants, and influential figures. Unfortunately, stories about these women did not always make it to the pages of chronicles, and their names were often forgotten. While men became legends, women remained only a quiet whisper on the pages of history. Nevertheless, without their participation, the pirate world would be completely different, devoid of the necessary balance and depth. After all, the sea, like life itself, favors those who independently choose their path, regardless of whether they wear a skirt or a doublet. Women who chose the path of piracy did not strive for universal adoration or immortal fame. Their motivation went much deeper than a banal thirst for profit. It was about the fundamental right to self-determination in a society where even the right to vote was in question. Without waiting for anyone's approval, they boldly moved forward, not needing instructions, banners, or regrets about the past. Some of them led a double life. By day, a young sailor, skillfully handling ropes and boarding. Weapons by night, a woman, stealthily washing blood from her clothes and saying a quiet prayer. These were lives full of tension and pretense, but not slavery, because behind the mask lay a high goal: to stay on the ship and avoid returning to the cage of prejudice. And it often happened that those who hid their true essence the longest gained the most respect, based not on gender, but on deeds committed. On pirate ships, women had to fight not only enemy cannons, but also prejudice from their comrades. The world in which they found themselves was far from ideal, full of rudeness, ridicule, and distrust. However, time, sea salt, and the fires of trials tempered their character. Over time, respect came through bloodshed in battles, through displayed courage, and through moments of rescuing comrades. And then, no one cared about a person's origin, only their true qualities. Pirate ships represented a space of paradoxes. Where on land a woman was not even allowed to raise her voice. Here she could confidently stand at the helm. Where women were considered the weaker sex, in the marine element they became an integral part of the raging storm. In the pirate environment, there was a clear division of labor and hierarchy, where some became quartermasters, a kind of manager, empowered to divide the loot and take over the leadership of the ship in the absence of the captain. Others chose the path of navigators, skillfully charting a course among the sea expanses. Alongside them, in the shadows remained figures whose influence nevertheless was enormous. It was they, like invisible directors, who determined the course of pirate raids, weaving intrigues and directing events. One should not forget the female presence in the pirate world, which manifested itself not only in battles, but also in the economic sphere. In port cities, a female stratum flourished, connected with pirates not by the sword, but by money and influence. Thus, Madame Ching, whose name was not known in the Caribbean, struck terror in the expanses of East Asia. In the Caribbean region, women who owned taverns often possessed power no less than that of captains. They, like experienced scouts, knew everything about the feuds between pirates, about ships entering the harbor, about drunkards and mercenaries hiding under the guise of ordinary sailors. Their tables in taverns turned into headquarters, and words could drastically change the route of a pirate raid. Women were not just participants in pirate life, but also its symbols. Ships were named in their honor. Their portraits adorned the sails. Their names sounded in pirate songs, engraved on sabers, whispered by the campfire. They appeared sometimes as ghosts who had left the earth for the marine element, sometimes as dreams too large for the shores, inspiring pirates to daring exploits and reminding them of the home they had once left. The feminine principle was felt most acutely with the first rays of the sun, when a weightless cloud of evaporation rose above the deck, when the smell of sweat and smoke was not yet felt, and only the aroma of the sea lingered in the air, and the fading stars twinkled in the heights. In these moments, standing at the edge of the ship, one could notice a figure, whether female or male, and realize before you is a person who managed to outwit fate, refused to live by someone else's rules, made a choice in favor of self-realization. And perhaps the most impressive thing in these narratives is not the weapon, not the bloodshed, not the battle cry, but the silence, the imperturbable, unshakable silence inside, the unwavering confidence in oneself, in one's own strength, in the chosen course. These women did not demand the observance of rites. They simply took up the oars, went on duty, raised anchors. They did not ask permission from the past. They created it. Why did they remain in the annals of time? Because they were like the wind, invisible but mighty, elusive but tangible. They sailed against the general direction, not for recognition, not out of arrogance, but because they could not do otherwise, because each of their actions is a step towards independence, not only for themselves but also for those who followed them. When imagination paints the image of a pirate, it is important to remember that the sea expanses were conquered not only by men. Often under the pirate flag fought women whose hands, adorned with rings and marked with barely noticeable scars, possessed no less strength and determination. And if one day in a dream a woman with a saber appears, confidently looking into the distance from the deck of a ship, one should not consider this only a figment of imagination. She is an integral part of maritime history. Among the numerous legends about pirates, a special place is occupied by legends about hidden treasures. Stories about chests of gold buried in the sand, about boxes of jewels hidden in caves, and about maps with a cherished cross indicating the location of the treasure have excited the minds of adventurers for centuries. These stories, passed down from generation to generation, begin with the mysterious "they say that." For example, there is a belief that the famous pirate Blackbeard hid his treasures on one of the islands of North Carolina. Before his death, he allegedly whispered, "My treasure is where no one is looking, but everyone dreams of finding it." These words only fueled the curiosity of treasure hunters, who continue the search to this day. In the legends about Bartholomew Roberts, whose name has become synonymous with pirate prowess, there is a legend about a treasure map divided into 4 parts and given to 4 trusted persons. Alas, none of them escaped a premature death, and the secret of the location of the treasure went with them to the grave. So goes the rumor, shrouded in the haze of sea tales. But did the treasures really exist? Undoubtedly, pirates seized immense riches: gold and silver, glittering jewels, fragrant spices, luxurious fabrics, explosive gunpowder, fiery rum, and exotic goods from distant lands. However, preserving the loot was not easy. The absence of reliable banks and safes, the threat of capture of port cities, the risk of shipwrecks in the deep sea, and betrayal by comrades all compelled pirates to hasten the division of spoils. An immediate division after each raid was their unwritten law. Each received their share and was free to dispose of it as they saw fit. Some squandered everything in the nearest tavern. Some hid it, and some spent it on weapons, food, women, and tobacco. But did pirates bury treasure in the ground? It did happen. If the crew felt they were being hunted, if patrol ships loomed on the horizon, if there was no time to think, part of the loot could be hidden in a secluded bay, on a lost island, or in a dense forest. But only a few managed to return to their hiding places. This is how legends are born when someone, having hidden something valuable, disappears without a trace. The jewels remain buried under a layer of sand, consigned to oblivion by inexorable time. Undoubtedly, some treasure maps are not fiction. They were painstakingly drawn on skin, rough canvas, or yellowed scraps of magazine pages, sometimes to satisfy their own ambitions, and sometimes with the insidious intention of misleading. There were cases when pirates planted false maps on their opponents to divert their attention or lure them into cleverly laid traps. However, most of the pirate maps we know come from the pages of adventure novels, such as Treasure Island, which became popular in the 19th century. Maps with a mysterious cross have become a symbol not so much of real searches as of a cherished dream. Despite this, the thirst for adventure does not fade, and people continue to search. Every decade, daredevils set off in search of treasure, armed with metal detectors, shovels, old books, and undying childlike enthusiasm. After all, in the depths of each of us, there is a hope that somewhere there, in the shade of a sprawling palm tree, a cherished chest is buried, and somewhere nearby lies a skeleton, clutching in its bony hand the key to unlocking the mystery. On Oak Island, located off the coast of Canada, tireless treasure hunters have been trying to find legendary treasures for more than 2 centuries. Legend has it that immense riches are hidden in the depths of the island. Gold, ancient manuscripts, and perhaps even the treasures of the Knights Templar captured by daring pirates. Despite numerous excavations, cunning traps, and mysterious finds, the treasures have never been found. Nevertheless, the search continues, Because perhaps the real treasure is not gold and jewels, but the story itself, the exciting process of exploration, and the thrilling anticipation of discovery. Thus, legends wander, flowing not through the seas, but in the hearts of people. Anyone who listens to them involuntarily joins this exciting quest. Even falling into a slumber, one can vividly imagine holding an old map, tattered by the wind, and seeing in the distance, around the bend of the island, a secluded white beach. And now you are stepping onto its sand. Sometimes, stories about treasures are not just fiction, but real echoes of the past, imprinted in the earth. On the island of San Andres, near the coast of Nicaragua, locals still pass on legends of hidden caves, where, according to legend, pirates buried their chests of loot while escaping the Spanish Armada. Some old-timers claim that in their childhood, they found fragments of old chests, rusty locks, and tattered pieces of canvas. Archaeologists remain silent, but locals are sure gold lies beneath their feet. Not fabulous, but quite real. In Panama, in the vicinity of the Old City, ancient coins from Spain, France, and colonial times are occasionally unearthed. They seem to appear on the surface after heavy rains. Some of these artifacts date back to the times of piracy, when ships laden with treasures anchored off these coasts, and part of the cargo was hidden in secluded places, so as not to lose everything acquired in case of persecution. Sometimes there are finds even more mysterious and enigmatic. In 2015, sensational news spread around the world. The remains of the legendary galleon San Jose were discovered off the coast of Colombia. This ship, which sank in 1708 as a result of a fierce battle with English ships, was a real floating treasure trove. Its holds were crammed with gold, emeralds, and silver, whose total value today is estimated at an astronomical sum of billions of dollars. And although this is not a pirate treasure in the classic sense, the very idea of immense riches that have rested on the seabed for centuries and seem to be waiting for their hour has breathed new life into the ancient myth. Talk has resurfaced about the lost and forgotten, about secrets hidden from prying eyes, about those who hid treasures and those who tried unsuccessfully to find them. In this regard, stories of treasures that were found and then re-hidden are also remembered. Experienced fishermen in Jamaica sometimes tell stories about their friends or relatives who were lucky enough to stumble upon an old chest or a clay pot filled to the brim with silver coins. However, instead of reporting their find to the authorities, they divided the loot in deep secrecy, carefully covering their tracks, and in some cases even re-hiding the surviving treasures. And there is a reason for this. Treasure is not only a source of wealth, but also a heavy burden. It attracts envious glances. It can change a person beyond recognition. It turns bright joy into oppressive suspicion. That is why many people sincerely believe that it is better to indulge in dreams of treasure than to hold it in your hands, feeling the full weight of responsibility and fear. Myths about treasures continue to live in people's hearts, possessing a power that surpasses any rational argument. They do not require confirmation, since they appeal not to logic, but to human imagination, to the eternal craving for the unknown. We like to dream that in a secluded bay, in a cave accessible only during high tide, there is an old chest, bound in iron, with a lock touched by salt and time. Inside this chest are not only precious metals, but also the echo of bygone eras. Yellowed letters, old rings, mysterious amulets, objects that keep the warmth of the hands of people who have long gone down in history. These things do not shout about themselves. They quietly whisper stories of the past. A map with an ominous cross is not just a piece of paper. It is a symbol of hope, a guide to the path. It is the embodiment of the idea that in ordinary life, there is always a place for mystery, for something hidden, intended only for you. It is a promise of an incredible discovery, an opportunity to find something more than just gold. Sometimes, the cross on the map points not to material wealth, but to the path to self-knowledge, to peace of mind, to understanding one's place in the world. That is why legends about treasures are so fascinating. They allow you to believe in the existence of another dimension, where everything is possible, where everyone can feel like a captain of a long voyage, where the moonlight illuminates the path, and the whisper of the map in your hand leads through palm groves, sandy dunes, into the embrace of silence. When the eyelids close, the imagination paints a picture, the sound of the wind, like the rustle of ancient parchment, dried up and darkened by the relentless passage of time. On the fragile sheet, the outline of the island is visible, and on it is a solitary cross, like a symbol of someone's determination, a cherished dream, or perhaps even the questioner himself. After all, the desire to search is hidden in the very essence of man. And treasure is not always the glitter of coins. Sometimes it takes the form of a fleeting dream, revived memories, or a moment of serenity, when you feel like a pioneer whose feet touch the untouched sand of eternity. The chapter entitled The Decline of the Golden Age tells of war, treachery, and the persecution of pirates. Any freedom comes to an end sooner or later, even if it is born from the whisper of sea waves, even if it is fought for not with blades, but with the sincerity of hearts, even if it contains a truth inaccessible to the understanding of royal decrees. The decline comes gradually, like a prolonged lull before an impending storm, a fading melody by a night campfire, the last cry of a seagull, foreshadowing absolute silence. By the beginning of the third decade of the 18th century, the pirate trade had lost its appeal. Empires, which had long turned a blind eye to freedom, no longer needed its chaotic existence. Colonial trade arteries grew stronger. Islands turned into impregnable fortresses. Cold calculation replaced disorder. What had recently aroused admiration and appeared as the attractive romance of endless sea expanses suddenly transformed into a serious threat, subject to immediate eradication. England initiated the active fight against piracy. King George I, showing political foresight, approved an act of general pardon, guaranteeing amnesty to all pirates who voluntarily cease their criminal activity and lay down their arms. This diplomatic move was designed to provide an opportunity for retreat to those who were morally exhausted from constant tension and risk. And indeed, hundreds of former buccaneers, tired of wandering and danger, preferred to surrender to the mercy of justice. They took a solemn oath of allegiance to the king, handed over their weapons to the authorities, and promised never to return to bandit raids. Among the repentant pirates were even famous captains, those who in the past had not been afraid of entire squadrons of warships. However, it turned out that fatigue and disappointment could break even the most desperate bravery, and the fear of the gallows was a very effective incentive to make a prudent decision. Those who ignored the call for peace and refused to stop their plundering raids were declared a real war to the death. The British Royal Navy received a categorical order to destroy pirate ships without any negotiations or compromises. Ships, proudly bearing the royal flags on their masts, began methodically scouring the Caribbean Sea, identifying and destroying pirate bases and ships. English sailors knew the pirates' favorite bays and shelters, their main routes of movement, as well as weak spots in their defenses. And so, one by one, the daring and rebellious ships that had previously roamed the seas began to disappear. Fires broke out, destroying pirate flags, and masts fell silent, deprived of their sails. Simultaneously with the naval operation, an active phase of arrest began on land. In port cities, which had recently hospitably welcomed pirates and provided them with shelter, grim gallows now stood, becoming a symbol of retribution. Anyone suspected of having connections with pirates or helping them risked sharing a sad fate and ending their life in a noose. The winds of change blew over the pirate islands, bringing with them new moods and morals. Those who had readily supplied gunpowder and rum to sea robbers yesterday were now eager to hand them over to the authorities in exchange for a generous reward, driven by greed. Betrayal became a kind of currency of that time, a means of achieving personal gain. It opened the door to forgiveness, guaranteed safety, and enriched with silver. Not all captains bowed their heads before the inevitable fate. Some of them, full of determination, continued the desperate struggle. Charles Vane, for example, contemptuously rejected the royal amnesty and, gathering his loyal comrades, fled, intending to continue his free life outside the law. However, his audacity and unpredictability did not save him from captivity. He was soon captured and taken to Jamaica, where he was brought to trial and sentenced to hang. Executioners erected gallows on the very shore, so that their sinister silhouettes would be clearly visible from passing ships, serving as a grim warning and a sentence imprinted on the horizon. Others, like Bartholomew Roberts, did not want to retreat a single step. He threw his crew into the thick of dozens of battles, won brilliant victories, held entire ports in fear, and captured countless ships. But he also met a tragic fate in an unequal battle with a British warship. He died a hero's death, and his body was committed to the sea so that no legend would be born on land. Pirate republics, like Free Nassau, were forcibly disbanded. Where rivers of rum once flowed and gambling flourished, strict garrisons were now located. Where decisions were once made by universal vote, royal decrees were now solemnly read out. Life inexorably returned under the yoke of the law, or, as the pirates would contemptuously say, under the hated yoke. The most terrifying aspect of what was happening was by no means artillery guns and gallows ropes, but all-consuming silence. The former brotherhoods, bound by ties of camaraderie, lost their integrity and disintegrated before their eyes. Those who had recently sworn allegiance and support suddenly turned into fugitives, hiding in the shadows and betraying the common cause. The sea, once dotted with the sails of daring ships sailing under free banners, yawned with frightening emptiness. Only the relentless wind continued its endless song, reminding of times gone by. The final raids of pirate ships resembled only pale shadows of past triumphs and daring adventures. Small ships trying to hide in the mazes of reefs were manned by exhausted but unbroken crews who had retained remnants of their former courage. Sometimes they managed to strike an unexpected blow, capturing a careless merchant ship, emptying its holds, and dissolving into the night darkness. However, such victories were short-lived, and each one came at a tremendous cost. Military patrols became more numerous and vigilant, and naval fleets operated with unprecedented efficiency. the authorities used the entire arsenal of means to combat piracy: bribery, persuasion, promises of amnesty, and merciless bullets. Everything was directed against the free sea robbers. Many captains, realizing that their time was irrevocably gone, preferred to disappear without a trace. They abandoned their ships to their fate, went deep into the islands, changed their names, and started life with a clean slate. Some of them found refuge in new colonies, where they became modest peasants, merchants, or broken heroes trying to forget their past. Others sought to preserve the spirit of freedom in their tales, in grim silence, or in the comforting embrace of a bottle of rum shared by the campfire. They were no longer pursued, as they were gradually forgotten. History turned away from them, ceasing to take interest in their fates. Some lost their lives far from their comrades, deprived of support, without a banner or a farewell song. Their mortal remains were discovered on deserted shores, or often not found at all. The names of these brave men faded into oblivion, and their resting places remained nameless. However, the boundless ocean preserved their memory. In every crashing wave, in every evening tide, the echo of the past could be heard. There was a time of great deeds. There were ships traversing the vastness. There was will and independence, but there were also those who survived, who managed to find peace in forgiveness and discover a new purpose in life. They lived long lives, sometimes full of joy, but perhaps with a hint of sadness, for one day, standing on solid ground, listening to the cries of seabirds and gazing at the horizon, they remembered not only battles and treasures mattered, but also that unique feeling of standing on the deck, feeling the wind on your face with a sail overhead like a wing, and only endless expanse ahead, only freedom of choice, only boundless will. Thus, an entire era came to an end, not suddenly and noisily, but like a receding tide, gradually, without unnecessary clamor. With each passing year, there were fewer and fewer who remembered the past, songs celebrating the lives of sailors were heard less and less often, and more books appeared where reality was intertwined with fiction, where legends overshadowed the truth, where ordinary people were made into symbols. And there was a certain charm in this as well, for pirates were gone, but not without a trace. They rose to the level of legendary figures. Their pirate flags became symbols of freedom. Their names became synonymous with rebellious spirit, and their life paths serve as an eternal reminder that even in a world governed by strict laws and regulations, there will always be those who dare to live their own way, outside the bounds of convention. Memories of them cannot be found in textbooks, but they live in the way a person gazes into the distance, at the horizon, in the way he, immersed in the silence of the night, dreams not of loud fame and honors, but of a favorable wind, of an island lost in the ocean, of a life free from any restrictions and fetters. The age of piracy came to an end, but an immortal legend was born. The memory of pirates and the romantic aura surrounding them continue to live on to this day. With the passing of the era, only its echoes remain, ghostly traces that are relentlessly washed away by sea waves, carried away by gusts of wind, lost in the dusty archives of history. However, sometimes it happens that these traces do not disappear without a trace, but transform into something greater, into a legend, into a magical dream, into a shadow that follows us closely, not instilling fear, but on the contrary, reminding us of something important. This is exactly what happened with the pirates. Their formidable ships have long turned to dust. Their sharp sabers are covered with rust, and their countless treasures have either long been found and appropriated, or forever forgotten and lost. But their vivid images continue to live in the hearts of people, remaining more alive than the memory of many who strictly followed the established rules and carried out the orders of others. Why is this so? Because pirates are not just a part of a long-gone history. They are an integral part of the inner world of every person. The legend of the boundless ocean, of a ship traversing the vastness, where there are no obstacles, of an existence subject to no one, of the right to choose, of a voice speaking out against the conventional. It is for this reason that pirates so quickly moved from the pages of historical chronicles to the pages of literary works. As early as the 15th century, the first romantic depictions of pirates began to appear, initially as frightening characters. They were presented as the embodiment of evil, as bearers of chaos, as opponents of civilization. However, over time, these images underwent significant changes. Horror gradually gave way to admiration. Their deeds began to be perceived not simply as a manifestation of cruelty, but as a challenge to established norms, their audacity, not as evil, but as a desire for freedom. In the 18th century, a real literary flourishing of pirate themes began in novels, plays, and ballads. The image of the pirate appeared not as the image of an ordinary robber, but as the image of a hero, rebellious, contradictory, but at the same time bright and memorable. The culmination of this process was Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. It is thanks to this book that the image familiar to everyone arose: a map with a cross indicating the location of the treasure, a chest filled with gold, rum, a wooden leg, and a parrot sitting on the shoulder. And although in reality all these elements were not so common, in our minds they have become an integral part of pirate life. Cinema only amplified this effect. On screen, pirates have become true archetypes, embodying a blend of rebellious spirit and nobility, humor and danger, solitude and charisma. From Treasure Island to Pirates of the Caribbean, they have repeatedly graced our screens, appearing in both comical and tragic lights, but always remaining a symbol of freedom. Piracy has left an indelible mark on global culture, evolving from a simple collection of historical facts into a powerful symbol. The ominous skull and crossbones flag, once instilling fear in sailors' hearts, is now perceived quite differently. It has become an emblem of rebellion, self-expression, and creative exploration, a symbol uniting musicians, artists, public figures, and all who dare to dream. This symbol no longer represents cruelty and violence. It embodies an alternative worldview, a call to live beyond boundaries and limitations. Modern society often dictates rules that deprive individuals of the chance to be themselves. However, deep within each of us lies our own island of freedom, a place where we can shed our masks, forget our social roles, and simply enjoy life. And somewhere on the horizon of this inner world, the silhouette of a pirate ship always beckons, sailing not by compulsion, but by the heart's desire. Memories of pirates are not just tales of daring robberies and naval battles. Above all, they are stories of courageous choices, of people who chose to follow their own path, even if it meant facing danger and uncertainty. That is why, when we delve into the world of pirate legends, read books, watch movies, or listen to songs about them, we feel as though we are raising sails in our own souls, experiencing a surge of freedom and a thirst for adventure. Today, pirates continue to live on in the pages of books and film scripts, in computer games and theme celebrations. But more importantly, they live within ourselves, in everyone who dreams of breaking free from routine, who has ever stood at a crossroads, wondering what would happen if they took the unknown road, relying only on intuition and the call of their heart, instead of reliable maps and guarantees. September 19th, known as International Talk Like a Pirate Day, began as a harmless joke, but has since evolved into something much more. On this day, people dress up in tricorn hats, adorn their faces with painted eye patches, and raise glasses of rum, allowing themselves to feel different for a moment, like participants in a colourful masquerade. This is not just an escape into carefree childhood, but rather a return to our roots, to the part of our soul that still holds memories of a life full of freedom and adventure. Children, engrossed in creating treasure maps and playing pirate games, may not think about the harsh realities of the 18th century, but their games embody the same indomitable spirit that drove Blackbeard toward the horizon, the same tailwind, the same unquenchable thirst for the unknown. After all, a pirate is not just someone who engages in robbery, but also someone who dares to disagree with accepted norms, who is in constant search, who strives to forge their own path, even if they are alone. And adults, weary of daily routine and having forgotten the taste of adventure, sometimes glance at the sea horizon, at the twinkling stars, or at the lines of an old novel, and something deep within them resonates, as if somewhere in the depths of their soul, the creaking of a ship's mast is heard again, awakening the desire to change their lives, break free from the captivity of the mundane, and once again feel like the captain of their own destiny. Perhaps this is the main legacy of pirates, not in gold, not in captivating legends, and not in buried treasures, but in the opportunity to remember that humans are inherently free, that we can boldly raise our sails, even if everyone around us says we shouldn't, that we can remain true to ourselves not because of, but in spite of circumstances, and that even amidst raging storms, we can find our own unique course. The pirate era has faded into oblivion, but the phantoms of sea robbers continue to stir the imagination. These images have transformed into peculiar reflections of ourselves, into dreams that penetrate the subconscious, into a truth carefully veiled by routine and ordinariness. Perhaps that is why this speech is perceived as a magical story, as a soothing melody, as a heartfelt song sung by a blazing campfire. And the point is not in fiction at all, but in the fact that pirates are a part of our essence. When it is time to sleep, when the world around us stills, and consciousness gains lightness, like rocking on quiet water, a lonely bell can be heard in the night silence. It swings on the ship's mast, the wind plays with the ropes, the sail fills with air, and the ship slowly leaves the harbor. You are on board this ship, and regardless of where your path lies, this is your destiny. Good night, Captain.